consent for Mr. Rosendale to sit on the subcommittee, so we can hear from him in a moment about his bill. Seeing no objection, you're in. Okay, let's go to Mr. Quigley. You're recognized for 5 minutes on the Big Cat Protection Act.
Thank you all for inviting me today to address you considering H.R. 263, the Big Cat Public Safety Bill. I'm grateful to the committee for holding a hearing. I picked up the mantle on big cats about 3.5 years ago because it was clear that animals like lions, tigers, cougars, and other big cats simply cannot be held in private hands without being a threat to their owners and communities. Right now, an estimated 10 to 20,000 big cats are currently being held in captivity around the U.S. The exact number is unknown because of how many big cats are being held in private hands. The Big Cat Safety Act would amend the Captive Wildlife Safety Act to prohibit the possession of lions, tigers, and other big cat species by individuals who are not licensed by the USDA. It is a very narrowly focused bill on privately owned animals with exemptions for sanctuaries, universities, and zoos. This bill would also restrict direct contact between the public and big cats for the safety of humans and animals alike, particularly through cub petting and photo opportunities, which fuel a cycle of breeding and dumping cubs when they outgrow their usefulness. Some states have banned private ownership of big cats already, but this problem requires a federal solution that will protect communities, law enforcement, and animals alike. Some believe that private ownership and familiarity with these animals will support large conservation goals for these species worldwide. However, the rampant exotic pet trade in big cats diminishes U.S. credibility in conservation efforts abroad. Domestic issues with private ownership of big cats has hamstrung international efforts by the State Department to end cruel tiger farming globally. The Big Cat Safety Act has been endorsed by the Fraternal Order of Police, the National Sheriff's Association, and numerous state and local law enforcement agencies. Because 500-pound carnivores pose a serious and very real threat to first responders, law enforcement officers, and entire communities around the country. Thank you to Sheriff Lutz for being here today to speak to the urgent need to establish this federal policy and for providing his expertise on the matter. This bill is also endorsed by the Humane Society of the U.S. and countless other animal welfare organizations. Because lions and tigers do not belong in urban apartments or in cages in suburban backyards, and because private citizens simply do not have the resources to care for dangerous animals that are meant to roam over hundreds of square miles. The bill is supported by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums and not opposed by the Zoological Association of America, the Trade Association for Small Roadside Type Zoos. Because ripping newborn cubs from their mothers moments after the birth to use as props in photos is already cruel enough. But then, once they become too big to be safely held, brutally killing them is simply wrong. More than 67,000 Americans have signed a change.org petition calling for the immediate passage of this bill because the public knows how exploitive, dangerous, and inhumane this tiny so-called industry truly is. What Americans do know is that they are helping shoulder the cost of monitoring and regulating big cat private ownership. When big cats are rescued from horrific conditions or simply abandoned by overwhelmed owners, the American taxpayers pay for the care and feeding of these cats. On behalf of myself and the 256 co-sponsors of this bill, thank you for your time and for holding this hearing today, and I'm hopeful this bill can earn swift passage through the committee. Last Congress, this bill passed the House of Representatives with a vote of 272 to 114. This bill must pass the Congress this year to ensure these exotic animals are no longer endangering themselves and the safety of our communities. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ohio. Welcome, Sheriff Lutz.
Chairman Huffman, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you great. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good evening. Chairman Huffman, Ranking Member Bentz, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony concerning the Big Cat Public Safety Act, H.R. 263. I'm the Sheriff of Muscatine County, Ohio, and I have served in this role for 14 years with a total of 33 years in law enforcement in addition to decades as a volunteer firefighter. I oversee and serve alongside a team of more than 100 fellow law enforcement officers to protect one of the largest counties in our state. I have firsthand experience with the dangers of captive big cats, the very dangers that H.R. 263 aims to address. In late 2011, an exotic animal collector released more than 50 exotic animals, including 38 tigers, lions, and cougars that he had been keeping on his property in Zanesville, Ohio. When terrified neighbors began to see big cats, bears, and other non-native species running loose near their properties, they turned to my office. In order to protect our community, we had to make the difficult decision to shoot the animals before they could harm or kill anyone. This decision, although the right one, brought major adversity to my office, my officers, and my community. This shocking incident placed a heavy burden on our deputies and the office as a whole, inflicting trauma among first responders, some of whom needed quite some time to cope with the experience. When faced with iconic animals that they would never want to harm, they were forced to think about the potential consequences of deadly animals getting further into our community, including the imminent danger to children playing a soccer game just down the road. My deputies had to act swiftly under unimaginable circumstances, putting down most of the animals and risking their lives to do so. In addition to the human cost, this crisis placed a significant resource burden on our public safety resources. In the course of just 2 days, my office incurred thousands of dollars in overtime and related expenses while responding to this single incident. Indeed, pet big cat collectors are able to externalize the risk created by irresponsible ownership, leaving taxpayers to bear the cost when big cats escape or otherwise jeopardize the public. I want to stress that the outcome in this case could have been exponentially worse. It is miraculous that there were no loss of human life or serious injury that day. The outcome could have been much worse if any single condition had been just slightly different, and it could be far worse the next time. Fortunately, enacting H.R. 263 can help to ensure that there is no next time. In fact, if the Big Cat Public Safety Act had been in place, the exotic animal collector in Zanesville would not have been allowed to acquire and keep these deadly big cats in his backyard. And my office and my community would not have had to rely on luck to avoid the loss of life. In addition to escapes and attacks, the mere presence of dangerous big cats can make it substantially more difficult to respond to emergencies. If first responders are called to address a crime, medical emergency, or fire, unexpectedly encountering a dangerous big cat puts the responders in harm's way and makes it more difficult to manage an already risky circumstance. First responders should not be expected to add the risk of encountering deadly wild animals, which could be eliminated through proper legislative action, to the list of dangers inherent to their roles. The Big Cat Public Safety Act represents a critical opportunity to protect first responders as well as public and the animals themselves. H.R. 263 will prohibit individuals from keeping tigers, lions, and other big cats as pets and limit dangerous direct contact between the wild animals and the members of the public, while exempting USDA licensed exhibitors. After the exotic release in my community, the Ohio legislature took action to restrict private ownership within the state. But across the nation, exotic pet laws comprise a confusing patchwork, trying to safeguard the public from unpredictable wild felines exclusively through state and local action ignores the very nature of these dangerous species and their interstate trade. Accordingly, a federal solution in the form of H.R. 263 is essential to protect communities across the U.S. We cannot stand by waiting for the next dangerous big cat crisis. It's time to take a stand for first responders and community safety. And Congress has the opportunity to do just that by enacting the Big Cat Public Safety Act. The National Sheriff's Association has endorsed the measure, as have countless individual first responders, animal care agencies, and rescuers across the U.S. I hope the subcommittee will join them in supporting this long overdue public safety measure. I respectfully ask the subcommittee to advance H.R. 263. Again, I want to thank all of you for the opportunity to testify today.
Sheriff, thank you very much. We'll next hear from Mr. Carter. Are you still with us? Let me start by...
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Sheriff. Let me start by apologizing. I think I was mispronouncing your last name, but it is Sheriff.
That's fine.
It is Sheriff Lutz, and I want to ask you why current federal law is not adequate to protect the public from the kind of situation you unfortunately had to encounter. My understanding is that there's currently an exemption for entities registered with the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, or APHIS, in the Captive Wildlife Safety Act. Why is that not enough to protect people from these situations?
Well, Senator Huffman, thank you, Representative Huffman, thank you for the question. And I don't have all the answers as far as what's actually in that legislation or what that covers. I can tell you why we need a federal act is because of the situation in Ohio. There's a lot of states that still don't have that. And so when we enacted our legislation, it put some restrictions in place that allowed for us to be able to do things. And, you know, the one you're talking about, I don't think prohibits pet ownership. And so in our situation, you know, we had a lot of things where we didn't even know what this owner had. So the legislation that we have now puts permits in place, puts inventory list in place. And again, I think because of this trade, the criminal element has no concept of borders, of state borders, even down to county borders. And so that's why there needs to be something in place, at least for these states that don't have their own legislation.
Yeah, you talked about not even knowing, who has these cats. There may be some people who think, well, if law enforcement is not prepared to respond to these situations, maybe we should just equip them with tranquilizers and other things like that. Why is it more complicated than that, Sheriff?
Yeah, great question. And it's been over 10 years now that we face those questions as well. And look, law enforcement is tasked to the limit now. We have so many things that we have to train our people on. We have so many things that we're asked to prepare for. And really, the first responders, the frontline people, we're the ones that get those calls. And so we just don't have the ability to take on the extra that would be just the knowledge of how to deal with these animals that should be left up to veterinarians or left up to all these people that are qualified to have these, not people that are keeping them in their backyard. And so the resources to start with, the knowledge, the ability, none of that would be present for us to be able to take on, just like we didn't have the ability to do that back when we had our incident.
Right. As bad as that scene was that you described, and it's got to be something that haunts you and your officers. It sounds like it could have been a lot worse for the community that you serve.
Yes, sir, and I appreciate that question. We were very fortunate. I've said many times we were very lucky. Our incident started because of a neighbor that had lived beside this property, several neighbors, but the two neighbors that lived exactly beside it were very familiar with it. I was very familiar with it. But them calling when they've seen the first couple animals out got our people there very quickly. And because it was still daylight hours, we were able to see what was in front of us. And so without that phone call, without those neighbors getting us there and our people doing what they did, kind of surrounding the area, that would have been huge. And it's still very miraculous today that we had no injuries from that incident that day.
Remarkable. Thanks very much, Sheriff. I will yield back and recognize Ranking Member Bentz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Sheriff, just to continue with you for just a moment. So we also have in Oregon a ban on using dogs to hunt big cats. And I'm just curious, in your space, if you have to go find a big cat, how do you use dogs?
Ranking Member Bentz, I've never been asked to do that in my 33 years in law enforcement. We've never had to go search for any types of these animals. I can tell you a very quick story. The day of our incident, it went into the next day. We had some rain overnight, and we were told by a lot of the professionals that because the storm had come in, if there were any animals still loose, they would probably bed down. The next morning, we heard a large cat. I can't remember if it was a Bengal tiger or the lion, but it was a large cat in a neighboring tree grove from where we were dealing with this problem. Because we had a vet, because we had some experts on the scene, because we had some tranquilizers, because we had plenty of people, we actually tried to approach that cat to tranquilize it. We didn't have to use a dog. We knew where this one was at. But when the vet hit that cat with a tranquilizer, you heard the cat, and then the cat responded by coming out of the woods at the vet who shot that, and we had to put it down. So just to see that kind of that kind of animal coming at you and that reaction just kind of verified what we did. And I would hate to be anywhere with a dog trying to find one of these animals.
Right. I'll just share with you, Sheriff, that in my state, there's been a ban on hunting cougars, and as a result, we are, I hate to say inundated, but we have way too many, and in fact, they're starting to creep into spaces where children play. And the question really is, when you have large forested areas of millions of acres, how in the world do you control big cats when you don't have dogs? Because I guarantee you, individuals cannot go find those creatures without the help of a dog. But moving on, Mr. Vanderwall, the Bureau of Reclamation's testimony on HR 3081 stated the bill will increase power.
And the members for their engagement. Members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for our witnesses. We will ask you to respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the record will be held open for 10 business days to allow for responses. If there's no further business before the subcommittee, hearing none, then without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thanks.